Radar systems. 1 fire's window. 18 minutes. That is all it took for the Ukrainian 45th Artillery Brigade to blind Russia's counter-battery network along the Kupyansk axis and flip the fire's advantage overnight. 3 Zoopark 1 systems. Each one the electronic eye that had been hunting Ukrainian gun crews for months, gone in a single coordinated salvo. This is the story of how that happened, and why it almost didn't. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight, we're going deep inside a counter-battery fires operation that rewrote the tactical calculus along one of the most contested axes on the Eastern Front. This isn't just a story about artillery. It's a story about a dilemma that every fires commander faces when the enemy can see your muzzle flash before your round even lands. To understand what the 45th Brigade accomplished, you first need to understand what they were up against. And what they were up against was arguably the most dangerous piece of electronic equipment Russia deploys at the brigade level. The Zoopark 1M, officially designated the 1L219M, a ground-based radar system on a wheeled vehicle capable of detecting incoming artillery rounds and calculating their point of origin in under 15 seconds. Range: up to 40 kilometers for rocket artillery, 25 kilometers for tube guns. The system doesn't just detect, it triangulates. It feeds firing coordinates directly to Russian counter-battery systems before the Ukrainian round has even reached its target. In practical terms, a Ukrainian gun crew fires a mission, the Zoopark catches the muzzle signature, and within 60 to 90 seconds, Russian artillery is already working the Ukrainian firing position. That's not a difficult tactical environment. That's a death sentence on a timer. The 45th Artillery Brigade had been operating under that death sentence for weeks before the fires window opened. The Kupyansk axis had become what Ukrainian fires planners internally called a compressed zone, a strip of terrain where both sides had registered virtually every road junction, tree line, and field edge. The Russians held the counter-battery initiative not because their gun crews were better, but because their Zoopark network gave them information faster than Ukrainian crews could displace. Displace. That's the key word. In modern counter-battery warfare, a gun crew that fires and stays in position is a gun crew that gets hit. The doctrine is shoot and scoot. Fire the mission, immediately move the weapon to a new position before the enemy radar can process the trajectory data and deliver a counterstrike. The 45th's crews were doing this, every mission. But the Zoopark network along the Kupyansk axis was dense enough that even a 3 to 4 minute displacement window wasn't sufficient. Russian counter-battery rounds were walking into secondary positions faster than Ukrainian planners had modeled. 3 crews had already been forced to abandon damaged equipment. 1 had taken casualties. The brigade fires officer, working from a command post concealed beneath a stand of pine trees 12 kilometers from the forward edge, was facing a calculation with no comfortable answer. Which weapon was deadlier in this counter-battery environment? HIMARS, precision rockets, conventional tube artillery, or drone-designated strikes? Comment below with your analysis. The answer shapes everything that follows. The calculation went like this. The brigade had fire missions that needed executing. Ukrainian infantry holding positions along the axis needed fire support. Suppression of Russian observation posts, interdiction of supply routes, counter-battery support when Russian artillery worked Ukrainian trench lines. Every hour those missions stayed unexecuted, Ukrainian soldiers bled for it. But every time the brigade's tube guns fired without suppressing the Zoopark first, Russian radar caught the signatures and counter-battery came within 90 seconds. The fires officer had a targeting package on the Zoopark systems. Ukrainian drone reconnaissance had been building that package for 3 weeks. Patient, methodical observation of the radar vehicle's patrol patterns, their hide positions, the roads they used to relocate between operating cycles. Zoopark isn't a static system. Russian operators know it's a high-value target, so they move it on irregular schedules, typically every 4 to 6 hours of operation. The drone teams had mapped 4 operating positions for each of the 3 radar vehicles in the sector. 3 weeks of observation, 4 positions per vehicle, 12 potential target sites. The fires officer knew where the radars would be. What he didn't know was when all 3 would be at known positions simultaneously, and whether the brigade could execute strikes on all 3 fast enough that none of the surviving vehicles could process targeting data and call in counter-battery on the strike platforms. That was the dilemma. Hit 1 Zoopark, and the other 2 immediately light up the firing positions. Hit all 3 simultaneously, and you need a fires package big enough to service 3 targets in a single salvo window, which means committing resources the brigade doesn't have an unlimited supply. Stay with me. Because what develops over the next 18 minutes of tactical execution destroys not just 3 radar systems, but the entire Russian counter-battery advantage along the axis. The obstacle that nearly derailed the operation had nothing to do with Russian action. It came from the brigade's own command chain. The fires package, the 45th, had required temporary attachment of a HIMARS element, a M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system with a supply of M31 unitary rockets range up to 70 kilometers, CEP under 5 meters. The HIMARS was the only platform in the brigade's available inventory that could service all 3 Zoopark positions fast enough and with sufficient standoff that the firing platform itself wouldn't be caught by surviving radars during the engagement. The HIMARS attachment was approved, then delayed, then approved again, then suspended pending higher priority tasking. For 72 hours, the 45th's fires officer worked his targeting package in a planning cell with no certainty that the platform would arrive. The infantry commanders whose men were bleeding on the forward line made their feelings known through the chain of command. The pressure was not subtle. The HIMARS arrived on a Wednesday night, moving under blackout conditions along a secondary road that Ukrainian engineer teams had assessed for bridge loading capacity 2 days earlier. The vehicle's crew, 3 soldiers who had been running continuous operations for 11 days, conducted a systems check, confirmed ammunition load, and received the targeting package from the 45th's fires cell. They had 12 M31 rockets available. 12 rockets, 3 targets, 4 rockets per target. The fires officer had planned 4-round salvos per target to ensure system destruction rather than temporary suppression. Here is where the cat-and-mouse dynamic inverted in a way no one in the planning cell had modeled. One of the Ukrainian drone teams conducting pre-strike surveillance on the Zoopark positions observed something anomalous at the primary radar vehicle's current operating position. The vehicle was transmitting. Expected. The system was active, scanning the sector. But the transmission pattern was irregular. Experienced drone operators who had spent weeks watching Zoopark operational cycles recognized that the vehicle appeared to be running an extended active transmission window, longer than its typical 4 to 6 hour operational cycle. 2 interpretations were possible. Either the vehicle was malfunctioning and couldn't complete its normal cycle, or the Russian operators had detected something that made them extend their active scanning. Perhaps they had picked up signatures suggesting Ukrainian fires preparation, and they were deliberately staying active to catch whatever was coming. If the second interpretation was correct, the Zoopark was not passive. It was hunting. The fires officer had a 20-minute decision window before the HIMARS would need to begin its approach march to firing positions. The options were strike on schedule and risk that an alert Zoopark crew might detect the HIMARS launch signature and get targeting data to Russian counter-battery before the salvo completed, or delay the strike and lose the synchronization window where all 3 systems were at known positions. He chose to strike on schedule. But he modified the approach. Instead of positioning the HIMARS at the pre-planned firing location, a position that offered good standoff but required a straight-line approach along a road that ran within partial line of sight of the active Zoopark. The fires officer directed the HIMARS crew to use an alternate approach that added 6 minutes to the approach march but kept the vehicle masked behind a reverse slope until it was within 4 minutes of the firing point. 6 minutes. In military planning at the brigade level, 6 minutes is not a small number. It meant the synchronization window shrank. It meant that if either of the 2 secondary Zoopark vehicles relocated ahead of schedule, the fires package would service a target that was no longer there. The HIMARS crew made up 2 of those 6 minutes by accepting a rougher approach road than the planners had originally designated. The vehicle took the road at a speed the crew later described as inadvisable for a loaded rocket system, and it arrived at the firing point within 4 minutes of the original schedule. How many Russian radar and electronic warfare assets did Ukraine destroy along the Kupyansk axis during the fires operation? A-4 systems, B-3 systems, C-7 systems? The answer comes at the end, but the number matters less than what the destruction achieved. 4 minutes past the original window, 3 Zoopark vehicles at known positions, 12 rockets, 1 fires window. The HIMARS crew received firing clearance at precisely the moment Ukrainian drone operators confirmed visual on all 3 radar vehicles at their designated positions. The confirmation came through a digital fires network that Ukrainian forces had been developing and refining throughout the full-scale phase of the war. A system that allowed drone operators to push target confirmation directly to fires platforms without routing through multiple command nodes. The round trip from drone visual confirmation to fires clearance took 43 seconds. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happens in the next 4 minutes is a masterclass in synchronized fires that NATO doctrine writers will study for the next decade. The first salvo, 4 M31 rockets, left the HIMARS launcher in a sequence that took 11 seconds. The rockets were pre-programmed with the coordinates of the primary Zoopark target, the vehicle that had been running the extended active transmission. Range to target, 41 kilometers. Flight time at that range, approximately 53 seconds. In 53 seconds, the rockets would either destroy the primary radar vehicle or they wouldn't. There was no adjustment window, no correction. The coordinates were the coordinates. While the first salvo was in flight, the HIMARS crew executed a rapid reload sequence for the second salvo targeting the second Zoopark position. This is where the platform's design shows its value in exactly this kind of time-compressed multiple target engagement. The M142 is a truck-mounted launcher. The reload is faster than any towed artillery system. The crew had trained for this specific scenario. Rapid successive salvos against time-sensitive targets with a tight synchronization window. The second salvo launched at 51 seconds after the first, 2 seconds before the first salvo's impact. Ukrainian drone operators watched the first impact sequence in real time through their surveillance feeds. 4 M31 rockets impacting in a pattern centered on the Zoopark vehicle's last confirmed position. The vehicle was not in a hardened shelter. It was operating from a tree line that provided visual concealment but offered no protection against direct hit precision munitions. The drone feed showed the first round impacting within 8 meters of the vehicle. The subsequent 3 rounds landed within a 15-meter radius. The Zoopark 1M vehicle ceased to exist as a functional system in under 3 seconds. At the moment of first impact, the second salvo was already 42 seconds into its flight toward the second radar position, and the HIMARS crew was loading the third salvo. The second Zoopark position was 4 kilometers from the first, close enough that any crew member watching their own radar feed might have seen the impact before the rounds arrived at their position, but not close enough to displace in time. The M31 doesn't give you time to run. It doesn't give you time to make a phone call. It gives you the 50 seconds of its flight time, and then it gives you nothing. Second salvo impacted at 49 seconds. Drone confirmation, direct hits on the vehicle and the support vehicles positioned adjacent to it. The Zoopark vehicle was destroyed. Secondary explosions indicated fuel or associated electronic components. The crew operating the system had no time to transmit targeting data, no time to call in counter battery on the HIMARS firing position. The radar eye closed permanently. The third salvo was in the air when the second salvo impacted. If you believe that precision matters more than mass in modern artillery operations, type EastAlert in the comments. This operation is the evidence. The third Zoopark position was the one that had concerned the fires officer most during planning. It was positioned 6 kilometers further back than the other two. A deliberate Russian layering decision that meant the third system had more warning time if either of the first two were struck. The Russian operators running the third system were experienced. They had survived multiple Ukrainian fires packages targeting the radar network. They knew what 4 simultaneous explosions at the positions of their sister vehicles meant. They began displacing. Ukrainian drone surveillance captured the moment. The Zoopark vehicle starting to move from its hide position, the crew acting on whatever threat instinct or standard operating procedure told them that if 2 vehicles died, they were next. The vehicle moved 60 meters from its operating position. 60 meters. The third salvo's pre-programmed coordinates were the operating position, not the displacement point. For approximately 4 seconds, it appeared the third system might survive. That the Ukrainian fires package, executed with near-perfect precision on the first 2 targets, might leave the third Zoopark operational, free to continue hunting Ukrainian gun crews, free to resume the counter-battery advantage Russia had held for weeks. The fires officer was watching the drone feed in his command post. He saw the vehicle moving. He had no ability to retask the inbound salvo. The rockets were in the air. What saved the third engagement was not Ukrainian planning. It was Russian institutional habit. The Zoopark vehicle moved 60 meters and stopped. Not because the crew was ready to resume operations. They hadn't finished their displacement. They stopped because the operator driving the vehicle was following a deeply ingrained procedure. When displacing under potential threat, move to the alternate hide, not away from the threat in a random direction. The alternate hide for the third Zoopark was a position the Ukrainian drone teams had mapped 3 weeks earlier. It was a position that the fires planning cell had designated as a secondary target coordinate, loaded into the firing system as a backup. The vehicle stopped at its alternate hide. The alternate hide coordinates and the salvo's programmed coordinates were not identical. They differed by approximately 70 meters. But the 4 M31 rockets in the third salvo carried their unitary warheads in a pattern, and one of the 4 rounds impacted within the lethal radius of the vehicle at its stopped position. 1 round was sufficient. The Zoopark 1M is a sophisticated system. It is not a heavily armored one. A direct hit from an M31 unitary warhead against a wheeled radar vehicle is not a survivable event for the vehicle or the primary systems aboard it. The third radar was destroyed. 18 minutes. Beginning of HIMARS approach march to confirmation of third target destruction. 18 minutes. 3 Zoopark 1M systems destroyed. The Russian counter-battery radar network along that sector of the Kupyansk axis had 3 fewer eyes at the moment Ukrainian infantry needed fire support most. The 45th Artillery Brigade's gun crews, which had been operating under a continuous counter-battery threat that required 3 to 4 minute displacement cycles after every mission, now had firing windows that opened dramatically. What would NATO doctrine have done differently with this fires package? The question is worth thinking through seriously, because the 45th's approach deviated from standard NATO counter-battery doctrine in one significant respect. Comment your analysis below. The aftermath assessment, compiled from Ukrainian drone surveillance conducted in the 48 hours following the fires operation, confirmed what the strike feeds had shown in real time. 3 Zoopark vehicles destroyed. Support vehicles at 2 of the positions also destroyed in the fires pattern. 2 BMP-based command vehicles that had been co-located with the radar systems for communications relay. Russian communications intercepts, analyzed by Ukrainian signals intelligence teams, showed a 12-hour period of near-total confusion in Russian fires coordination along the axis. Counter-battery missions that would typically have been called within 60 to 90 seconds of Ukrainian gun signatures simply weren't happening. The radar that would have caught those signatures was wreckage. Ukrainian General Staff reporting, consistent with OSINT analysis of satellite imagery from the area, confirmed that the 45th Brigade executed 14 fire missions in the 48-hour window following the Zoopark strike. Missions that would have been either impossible or suicidal under the previous counter-battery threat environment. All 14 missions were executed with full displacement protocol, and not one resulted in counter-battery fire on the Ukrainian gun position within the displacement window. 0 counter-battery hits in 14 missions. For a brigade that had been losing equipment and personnel to exactly that threat, that is not a small number. The human side of what the Zoopark network's destruction meant cannot be captured in fire mission statistics. The gun crews of the 45th had been operating for weeks under a stress load that goes beyond normal combat intensity. Every time a crew prepared to fire a mission, they knew the clock started the moment the first round left the tube. Displace. Now. 4 minutes. 3. Don't stop for anything. Move. The psychological pressure of operating artillery under active counter-battery threat. Knowing that the enemy has a radar that catches your muzzle signature and delivers counter-battery in 90 seconds is a compounding fatigue that conventional battle damage assessments don't measure. After the Zoopark network went down, a Ukrainian gun crew commander described the first mission his crew fired in the post-strike window. He said his crew fired the mission, called the round, and then stood at their gun instead of immediately executing the displacement sequence. Not because they were ordered to stand down, because for the first time in weeks, the immediate existential pressure of the counter-battery clock had lifted. For 10 or 15 seconds, they just stood there. And then they displaced anyway, because doctrine exists for reasons that don't disappear just because today's threat is lower than yesterday's. That is what the Zoopark strike gave the 45th Artillery Brigade. Not just fire missions, not just tactical advantage, a moment to breathe. The Russian response came 48 hours later. Satellite imagery confirmed that Russian logistics elements had moved at least 2 replacement radar vehicles toward the sector. Whether Zoopark 1M replacements or alternate counter-battery radar systems is not confirmed in open sources. What is confirmed is that the replacement timeline required Russian fires planners to operate without a functioning counter-battery radar network along the axis for a period that Ukrainian tactical planning could exploit. 48 hours without radar coverage in an active fires environment is not a minor operational gap. It is the difference between an artillery brigade that can support its infantry and one that is suppressed into near inactivity by counter-battery threat. The 45th used those 48 hours. The broader tactical lesson from the Kupyansk fires operation cuts against a common misconception about counter-battery warfare. The misconception is that the solution to an enemy counter-battery radar is to disperse your own artillery. Spread your gun lines out so that no single Zoopark sweep can catch multiple systems. That's true as far as it goes. But the 45th's fires officer identified something more fundamental. If the enemy radar network itself can be destroyed, the dispersal problem disappears entirely. The question is whether you have the fires, assets, the intelligence, and the timing synchronization to service multiple high-value targets simultaneously. The 45th had all three. The operation worked because 3 weeks of drone reconnaissance built targeting packages of sufficient quality that the fires officer could plan a simultaneous multi-target engagement with confidence in the coordinate data. It worked because the HIMARS provided the standoff, the precision, and the rapid-fire capability to service 3 targets in under 4 minutes. And it worked because Ukrainian digital fires networks had compressed the kill chain, from drone confirmation to fires clearance in 43 seconds, to the point where time-sensitive targeting against mobile systems became executable rather than theoretical. The answer to the quiz from earlier: 3 Russian counter-battery radar systems destroyed. Answer B. The number matters not as a trophy count, but as a threshold. Destroying 1 Zoopark would have relieved pressure on 1 sector of the brigade's fires coverage. Destroying 2 would have created a partial gap. Destroying all 3 simultaneously created a complete gap. No functioning radar coverage, which is qualitatively different from partial degradation. Ukrainian fires planning understood that threshold requirement. The fires package was sized to meet it. 3 systems, not 2, not 1, 3, simultaneously in 1 window. That threshold understanding, that partial degradation of a radar network is fundamentally different from total degradation. Is the doctrinal contribution this operation makes to how modern counter-battery warfare is understood. It's not enough to suppress the radar. You have to eliminate the network. Was the decision to accept a 4-minute delay for the HIMARS approach the right call? The fires officer chose to protect the firing platform at the cost of the synchronization window. If one of the Zoopark vehicles had relocated in those 4 minutes, the fires package would have partially failed. But a HIMARS detected and engaged by active radar counter-battery fire is a different category of loss than a partially successful fires package. The fires officer weighted platform survivability correctly. The operation proved him right. Could the Russian fires network along the Kupyansk axis have prevented this? Yes, but only if Russian radar operators had followed a more aggressive displacement schedule, moving vehicles every 2 hours instead of 4 to 6, accepting the operational disruption of more frequent repositioning in exchange for reduced vulnerability. The extended transmission window on the primary vehicle, the anomalous behavior that almost caused the fires officer to abort, was itself a symptom of inadequate displacement discipline. When the Zoopark crew should have been breaking down and relocating, they were still transmitting. That is not a failure of equipment. It is a failure of procedure. What would you have done differently? If you were the 45th fires officer, with 12 rockets, 3 targets, and a 4-minute synchronization window closing, would you have struck on schedule or waited for a cleaner window? The question has no clean answer, because waiting for a perfect window means your infantry bleeds in the meantime. That tension between tactical precision and the human cost of delay is what every fires commander carries. It doesn't appear in doctrine manuals. It doesn't show up in battle damage assessments. It lives in the planning cell at 2 in the morning when the infantry commanders are sending messages about casualties on the forward line and the fires package still isn't ready. The 45th Artillery Brigade made the call. The window opened. The fires went. 3 Zoopark systems are wreckage along the Kupyansk axis, and Ukrainian gun crews are breathing. Will Russia find a solution to Ukraine's precision counter-battery targeting before Ukraine develops the next generation of drone-assisted fires networks? Comment yes or no, because the answer determines how the next phase of this war unfolds. The Kupyansk axis is contested ground. It has been contested ground for longer than most military analysts initially projected. The firefights, the counter-battery exchanges, the drone operations, the supply line interdictions. They accumulate into something that looks, from a distance, like stalemate. But inside that stalemate, individual operations tip the local balance. The Zoopark strike tipped it. For 48 hours, the 45th Artillery Brigade owned the fires environment along that axis in a way they hadn't in weeks. That's what winning looks like in attritional warfare. Not breakthroughs, not dramatic flanking maneuvers. 18 minutes, 12 rockets, 3 radar systems, a fires window that opens. Real tactics, real consequences. EastAlert. Subscribe to EastAlert because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Understanding how modern warfare actually works, the intelligence cycles, the kill chains, the threshold targeting logic, is the only way to understand how this war ends. The tree lines along the Kupyansk axis are quiet in the hours after the fire's operation, but the wreckage remains. 3 Zoopark vehicles, burned out and silent, where radar antennas once scanned the sky for Ukrainian muzzle flashes. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. And when the fire's window opens, 18 minutes is all you need. Stay vigilant.